Now, Singapore's rise from colonial backwater to one of the richest nations in the world makes it the envy of those nations that strive for the same success. As the island city-state celebrates 50 years of independence, the next 50, though, could be a greater challenge as it combats a falling birth rate and soaring property prices. The ruling People's Action Party may call for an election as early as next month in an attempt to capitalise on the celebrations. Sohail Rahman has more.
He's lived through all of Singapore's modern history. Born in 1934, Bill To owns this comic book store in a small part of the city.
Issue 1.
In his day, he was at the forefront of a changing Singapore. As an assistant superintendent of the police force, he was part of a team that saw colonial rulers leave and then fought communist ideology during the Cold War.
As a security officer, I had no doubt where we would get to where we are today, because I knew our former Prime Minister was capable of taking us to where we are.
That former Prime Minister was Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father, who retired from office and died earlier this year, but not before transforming the island nation from a small colonial beginning to one with a growing economy, flourishing tourism industry and a centre for international commerce. New shiny skyscrapers sit side by side with their predecessors. There is room for both in a country that is proud of its age, its history and achievements. Young and old are visiting museums and galleries and enjoying the shows on offer. The weather is not putting off the thousands who've decided to share the 50th anniversary of Singapore's independence.
It is looking to fulfill.
For some, like historian Jaya Ayadurani, remembering the past is a humbling experience.
The younger generation live in the first world state. They don't understand what we went through. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have safety. I came home one day being told at 8 years old that we were linked to the national grid, and it was electricity. And that's the kind of life we went through.
For many, the past cannot be forgotten. The death of Lee earlier this year and what he achieved during his tenure has led to speculation that a general election may be called in the coming months. An election that would determine the future direction that this island nation moves towards. Back at Bill's shop, he's proud of the medals he's earned for long service and dedication. He's one of many here who are eager to make sure history doesn't forget the sacrifices of so many during the Second World War and independence. So for now, they're happy to join the party.
And joining me now via Skype from Singapore, Chief Economist and Regional Director at the Economist Intelligence Unit, Simon Baptist. Thank you for being with us. Now, it's a pretty remarkable story, isn't it, how far Singapore has come in the last 50 years. Its economic growth has been spectacular, but it's the next 50 years that could shape the country. Potential problems ahead, battling a falling birth rate, and people, they're not happy with the number of foreign workers coming in. What do you think are the challenges ahead for Singapore?
Singapore has been an incredible success story over the last 50 years. I mean, the country has made one of the largest transitions in terms of GDP per capita of any country around. So it certainly can look back on its record with some pride. But it's true that the economic formulas that have worked for the last 50 years are not going to be the same ones that are going to work for the future. A big part of the drive between Singapore's recent growth has been a higher population, which of course leads to higher GDP as there's more workers in the economy. A higher population has some economic benefits, but it also imposes some cost in terms of congestion and other issues. And those have been causing an increasing amount of discontent within Singapore and causing more and more political problems. And we have seen the government from time to time stepping in to periodically tighten up restrictions on foreign workers. And so balancing some of these factors that are going to be important in order to drive economic growth along with quality of life issues are more important. Now that Singapore is a developed economy, now it clearly is a high-income country, one of the richest places in the world, quality of life issues are becoming more important. Singaporeans are now looking to their government to not just provide more jobs and higher GDP, but to provide a good life. And that's going to take the government into some uncharted waters for policy making.
And speaking of the government, it was taken aback by the loss of seats at the last election. Since then, they've made compromises, given more to poorer families, and even cut back on their own million-dollar salaries as government ministers. What do you make of that?
I think that political reform is a key issue for Singapore over the next decade or so. I mean, Singapore is not a very free society. It has a lot of restrictions on election campaigning. In the last election, it was a bit of a surprise how well the opposition had done because there was not really an opportunity for that to be noticed by everybody because the election campaign is so short and there's such a lack of polling during the campaign to give an indication of where parties are travelling. Now, of course, this all serves to make life a bit easier for the incumbents. I mean, in this case, the People's Action Party, which has governed Singapore in an unbroken fashion since independence 50 years ago. Tied to that, there's also no democracy at the local level. So there's no opportunity for opposition politicians to make an impact or gain experience at the local level. Now, this, of course, feeds through into the national level because then there's no opposition politicians who are really able to effectively hold the government to account. Younger Singaporeans in particular, and the greater number of Singaporeans that are spending time in other countries around the world before moving back to Singapore, are less content with having their political voices silenced. And now that Singapore clearly is in the ranks of the developed world, and there's not worries about standards of living, issues such as political freedoms do become more important. And I think there's going to be a bit more agitation for that in Singapore moving ahead. And we do have an election coming up soon, and probably the government will call that early to capitalise on the euphoria around the 50th anniversary celebrations. Now, I expect they get the People's Action Party to win the next election, but a big question mark is how effectively will the opposition be allowed to contest them in terms of length of the campaign and also opportunities that they get in the largely state-controlled media.
Now, if we compare Singapore's story to Hong Kong, regionally, of course, its main rival has been with them. But Hong Kong has a bigger stock market, whereas currency trading, money management has been pretty strong in Singapore. But both have excelled at manufacturing and re-exporting. Is this by design, do you think, or just by accident?
I mean, both countries, of course, have a lot in common. I mean, they're small city-states on the edge of fast-expanding regions. ASEAN in the case of Singapore, China in the case of Hong Kong, and both with much more stable and business-friendly legal and business environments. So that they have similar cornerstones to their economies. And of course, they've both been big success stories over the last few decades. Both countries can clearly be held up as economic successes. Now, they are starting to have some divergence in their fortunes, and this is largely to do with the regions in which they find themselves. They do have some different strengths. Yes, Hong Kong, as you say, in equity markets, and Singapore in asset management. But Hong Kong is increasingly tied, of course, to the Chinese economy, and its future really lies in becoming a professional services centre for the mainland of China. There's a long way before Shanghai can fully compete with Hong Kong, and of course by then the Chinese economy will be so much larger. There's going to be room for more than one centre of professional services servicing the amount of business that will be going on in China. So that's Hong Kong's increasing role, less of a global entrepot and more as a professional services centre for China. Because Singapore is much more still playing that role as a trade hub and as a place for goods to pass through and as a base for multinational firms to explore the surrounding region. Singapore is tied to ASEAN, which is going to be a fast-growing region. However, it does also have a lot of hiccups. A lot of political and structural issues, and we see growth being quite slow in places like Thailand and Indonesia at the moment, are largely due to political and policy issues rather than economic ones. So the ASEAN region is quite a challenging one, but it does have a good medium-term outlook, and of course Singapore is in prime position to benefit from that.
Simon Baptist in Singapore, thank you.